All right, everybody. We've got so much art history and never enough time to cover it all. So let's go run through the art museum. We are still in chapter 29, and we're going to take a look at the Harlem Renaissance. Hey, we're going to go back to New York, and we're going to go back to New York City, which is down at the very southern tip of New York. And we're going to go take a look at Manhattan. Now, these are all the different neighborhoods of Manhattan there on the left, or all the areas of Manhattan. Can you find Harlem on that map? Yeah, it's the pink one at the top. And I know you guys are just as into comics as I am. If you've been watching the Daredevil show or been reading Daredevil comics, that guy works over in Hell's Kitchen. And then there's a Luke Cage TV show, and based off of a comic, and he is the hero of Harlem. Anyways, I'm going to throw some history at you. After slaves were emancipated, there was a huge movement of African Americans from the South to the North. The main reasons is that we had the industrialization of America, so cities were becoming more industrialized. There's still a lot of Jim Crow laws in the South that made things unfair for African Americans, so they moved up north. And then there was a ton of jobs available up north because of that industrialization. And they moved into cities to take manufacturing jobs. So here's a couple of photographs from the era, and we're talking about the 1930s mostly, of African Americans in Harlem. Between 1919 and 1925, Harlem becomes the center of African American culture. Here, there's a lot of African American writers, African American musicians, African American artists, and actors. And they're all here in the same place at the same time. And the main themes of the writing, the music, and the art and the acting is the daily life of African American communities and African folklore, and also African American history. And they're trying to celebrate their history and culture. Not all of the artists of the Harlem Renaissance were based in New York or even America. A lot of them were still facing a lot of racism. So they moved to Paris and other places similar to that had a much lower intensity of racism. They did a lot of art there in Paris, but many of them came back and made schools and created other opportunities for other artists. Another thing that is going on at this time that we're looking at is, remember that it's the Great Depression. And so we have the WPA, or the Works Progress Administration, that's hiring a lot of people to do jobs. And as people lost a lot of jobs during the Great Depression, the government set up an entity that would put a lot of those people back to work and hopefully reboot the economy. The WPA was hiring artists to create artworks. And so a lot of the artwork that we're going to be looking at is a result of the WPA. And the style of art that we're looking at here is the Harlem Renaissance. And there is no single style that defines Harlem Renaissance. Artists found different ways to celebrate African American culture and identity, and many combined elements of African art with contemporary themes. The typical structure that I do these art history lectures on is, in order to show you guys an overview of a style of art, I will try to pick three artists. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. But I generally try to pick three artists that embody that style of art. And then with each artist, I would pick three artworks that embody that artist and that style the most. But with the Harlem Renaissance, I had a really hard time finding a lot of information about these artists. I could find little bits of information about these artists, but I had a really hard time finding a lot or important information. So we're going to see a lot of artists, and then we're going to hit a couple of points for each artist that is best that I can. So this is going to kind of feel like like we are running through the art museum. All right, so our first artist is Palmer Hayden. And his main work, it was this one right here. It's called The Janitor Who Paints. Palmer Hayden does a lot of artwork based on genre art. So we're taking a look at regular people doing regular things. Hayden had a friend. His friend's name was Cloyd Boykin, and this is Cloyd Boykin, who is depicted here in this painting. And he worked as both an artist and a janitor. He worked two jobs to support his family. Although he was an artist, Boykin was known as the janitor. No one called him the artist. But in this picture, you can see all the trades or the tools of the trade of being a janitor. You can see the trash can in the lower right-hand corner. There's a broom in there. There's a duster in there, a feather duster. But I also kind of want to point out some of the modern aspects of this painting. Look at how the space is flattened and how that floor is tilted up, and we have that compressed space like we have in modern art. And we have the simplified forms. All right, here's another one of his artworks. And then we can look at the simplified forms. This is like the epitome of genre art. In fact, if we compare it to the genre painting of the Dutch Baroque, we can see the similarities of it. How we're seeing the life of the community, but we can also see the modern influence of Hayden. So the space is flattened, the figures are flattened. All right, and I've got a little story for you. So this photograph right here is of the Great Bend Tunnel, and over 800 men cut this tunnel over a mile long through the mountain. And these guys are making railroads to go through the mountain. It is backbreaking work. And then tunneling through, making railroads is backbreaking work, and then tunneling through a mountain is backbreaking work. And these guys are doing both. This company that's making this tunnel hires a lot of black workers because they can pay them low wages, they can work them long hours, and they know that the African-American worker works really hard and he's willing to do dangerous work. Creating a railroad, you have this team of two guys. One is the steel driver and the other is the shaker. The steel driver is the guy that swings the hammer and he strikes on the drill, and the shaker holds the drill, and then after every time it gets hit, he turns it and then he shakes it after each blow. So this guy right here is John Henry, and he's the best steel driver. Now, the company wants to save money, so they brought in a drilling machine to make the process faster and cheaper. And this would take the place of men who need the job in order to feed their families. And it was said that the machine could work faster than any man. So John Henry, being the strongest of the group, said he would challenge the machine to a race. So we have this contest between man and machine. And so the machine and John Henry do this contest, this race, to get to the end of, I don't know if it's a mile of railroad that needs to be laid or what it was. But in the end, John Henry won the race. But he had spent all of his energy. He had basically worked himself to death, and he died right there at the end of the race, just having won it. And so Hayden creates a series of paintings based on John Henry, and we're going to take a look at this one right here. Palmer Hayden is working in the African American oral tradition by retelling the story. And he's expressing the society's reliance on African American labor. And if African Americans were to all disappear tomorrow, this industry would collapse. And so he's trying to bring attention to the new role of African Americans after World War I. All right, our next artist is Aaron Douglas, and he revolutionized African American art, and he was a leader with the Harlem Renaissance. So we're going to go to North Carolina. Where on this map is North Carolina? C is correct. All right, we're going to go to North Carolina, and there's a college here called the Bennett College for Women, and in here, Aaron Douglas paints a mural for the college called Harriet Tubman. Aaron Douglas also paints subjects of African and African American history, and he used a bold graphic style. Look at this painting right here. You notice how it's all just shapes, right? It's shapes and color. In fact, he's minimized the color to just green, like a greenish blue. In fact, he's minimized the color just like the cubists have minimized their color. And also, he's broken things up into different shapes. He's like the silhouettes are not, they're broken up into different colors. Do you see that in the Aaron Douglas painting? But my point in bringing in the cubist is that he is breaking up the space and he's using limited colors. Now, do you see any concentric circles in this painting? Right. Yeah, there's these concentric circles, and they do see a beam of light shining on Harriet Tubman in the middle. So these are common things that you'll find in Aaron Douglas paintings. He used the circles and the beams to create dramatic focal points and dynamic movement. But these abstract elements also enhanced the narratives of his paintings, and he made them more emotionally impactful. But these concentric circles is also a reference to the rhythms of jazz, which is also an important part of the Harlem Renaissance. So if we look at the center of this painting, there is Harriet Tubman, and she is breaking the chains that has shackled all the slaves. And she had helped over 400 slaves escape through the Underground Railroad. Notice that she's darker than the rest. So she and they have this really light area behind her. So that contrast between the dark on the light creates a focal point in the middle of the painting. Just under her, let me get my laser pointer, there is a cannon right here with smoke coming out of it. So this is a reference that the Civil War has just ended. And then we have a couple of figures. We have a figure here and a figure here that are praying, right? And also notice that they are shackled, right? So these are slaves that are praying for their freedom. Then on the left side, we can see these figures that that are carrying large sacks or large, heavy, burdensome weights on their heads and on their shoulders. And these are the slaves that are being forced to work. On the right side, we have a figure here that has a hoe. And so after the slaves were freed, they were free to till their own land. They could have their own land. And so here we have an example of that. Over here, we have a woman that is reading. And so this shows that African Americans have new educational opportunities after being freed from their slavery. And then over here, we have a guy down here looking up at these skyscrapers. And this is the future. He's looking up to a hopeful future. All right, here's another one of Aaron Douglas's paintings, and he represents the visionary scene of a soaring architectural monuments. And he's celebrating the contributions of the African descent to the achievements of human civilization. And he's referencing ancient Africans, like, and you can see this, the Egyptian pyramid, and then we have a profile of an Egyptian. But we also have some Western civilization figures right here of the Roman arch. And this looks very Greek to me, that they are also part of the tradition of building, and they're linking their future to their past. And this painting was based on a poem by Oliver Wendell Holmes, and it reads, "Building these more stately mansions, O my soul, as the swift seasons roll, leave thy now vaulted past, let catch new temples nobler than the last. Shut thee from the heaven with a dome more vast, till thou at length art free, leaving thine outgrown shell by life's unresting sea." All right, everybody, we're going to go to Texas. If you cannot find Texas on this map, I will tackle you during the graduation and announce to everybody that you cannot find Texas on a map. All right, where is Texas? D, yes, thank you very much. I won't have to tackle anybody. All right, so we're going to go to Texas, and we're going to head on up to Dallas. In 1936, Dallas has the Texas State Fair, and at this Texas State Fair, Aaron Douglas is asked to paint 4 murals. Two of them are now lost, but two have survived. So we're going to look at the one called Aspiration. This narrative tells the story of the African American history in Texas, and he tells it from an African American perspective. He feels that African Americans should embrace their heritage. And we have, do you see at the bottom of the painting, we have hands that are rising up and they have shackles on them. Like these are hands in bondage. These are the shackles of slavery. We have arms reaching up for their salvation. But also, what's kind of curious, do you see the wavy lines that we have over here? These wavy lines could be a reference to the Atlantic voyage that takes when the slaves get on the slave ships and make the trek across the Atlantic Ocean. During that trek, if any of the slaves became sick, they would just get thrown overboard to save the rest of the quote unquote cargo. All right. And we looked at the slave ship by J.M.W. Turner that did that. Now, some critics think that these hands down here are the slaves that have been thrown into the water and they're trying to swim up to the top to breathe again. All right, so we have three figures pointing to a city on a hill. The two figures on the left are modern African Americans, and they embody the new ideals of the Harlem Renaissance. There's a sense of hope. Slavery has been banished 50 years ago before painting this, and they're still living under Jim Crow laws. So the figures are imagining a world where racial discrimination is no more. And in the upper left corner, we have lightning, and you can see the dark clouds. That means danger is coming. We have darkness, and the figures are turning away from the danger towards the light, towards the shining city on the hill. The guy on the far left, he has a couple of scientific tools with him, and it is believed that he is Benjamin Banneker, who is a famous astronomer and mathematician. The guy in the center, it is believed that he is George Washington Carver, an agricultural chemist. And then the woman on the right is thought to be Queen Tyre because of her hair and the profile fits. And she represents Mother Egypt. And she's the embodiment of the African and Egyptian history. And she's also looking up to the hill. And she has an open book in her hand, which is the symbol of knowledge. And notice that she is the color of purple, which is a royal color. And then other art historians have compared her to Michelangelo's Sibyls that he has up on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Did you guys notice the stars that are repeated over and over? That could be a reference to the Lone Star State, or it could also be the reference to the star that the slaves followed when they were going through the Underground Railroad. We also have concentric circles, which is a reference to sound waves or jazz.